Everybody, welcome to the Rangers Review morning briefing for Wednesday, the 9th of November. It's game day as Rangers gear up to take on Hearts at Ibrox this evening to look ahead to that match and also the financial accounts which have come out this morning. First of all, Joshua Barrie, how are we doing, Joshua?
Good, Derek. Good to be back with you, but big event today having our good friend David Edgar on, who we have got up at 9:35 this morning.
It's great to have. Yeah, it's great to have David on. Thanks very much, David, for coming on. Of course, from the Heart and Hand podcast. Fantastic to get you on to talk all things Rangers.
Yeah, I only found out this show existed today because anything before about 12 o'clock, there'll be monsters as far as I'm concerned. No, it's nice to be here. I usually watch it a bit later, so that's actually left a hole in my day now. I'll make plug with something else. I'm not watching myself.
Right, guys, before we talk Rangers, of course, and we touch on the financial accounts, you can see the little ticker below. We've still got that great offer on the site, just £1 for 2 months worth of content. Head over to rangersreview.co.uk/subscribe for all the details. Right, Rangers have announced their annual accounts today, as I mentioned, with an operating profit of £5.9 million recorded in the past financial year. The club have released their annual report and accompanying financial statement for the year that ended the 30th of June 2022. The figures report a huge swing from the £21.7 million operating loss in last year's accounts to an operating profit in the past 12 months. Much of that is down to that Europa League run, of course. I think generated around £30 million, if I'm not mistaken. And likewise, the Nathan Patterson transfer, I believe it's around about just over £11 million that have been brought in with regards to that. David, have you had a look at the financial accounts? What do you make of this news that's coming out this morning?
Yeah, overall it's good. The headline figures, of course, are very good, as you might expect. When you dig deeper, as always, there are a couple of issues that might make you wince, as happens in these books. But the turnover going up is huge. That's vitally important. It's also vitally important for FFP because, as we know, we were placed on an FFP watch list, for want of a better term, and FFP comes off of your turnover. So clearly, the bigger the turnover, anything you can do to get that number up is very useful. So in terms of commercial revenue, that's great. It's gone up. James Bisgrove said at the AGM last year it would go up to 27 million. He said it's sitting at 28 million in the accounts. That's great. The negative is the Sports Direct payment. That's something I think we can all remember Dave King telling us a few years ago that was completely done. It turned out it wasn't. There's been a payment of about 8.2 million to them. And clearly that's money that's just gone out of the club. But it had to be paid to get out of this Sports Direct situation, and that is it, finally and completely done. That was what the finished court case means. So overall, it's very healthy. You've still got for example, the Barrie and Aribo money. That's not in this year's account.
Yeah.
The Champions League clearly isn't in this year's account. So Rangers are on an even keel financially. We're not rolling in it. It's fair to say, but we are in a healthy position, even though, as I say, there were one or two things that were a wee bit sort of oofed.
Yeah, is that your dogs looking to get in on the video too,
yeah,
David?
It is.
More dogs the merrier, I think.
They're very excited. I've got as well as my older dogs, I've got a puppy now, and she likes to get in on stuff. So my apologies to everyone about that. I'm trying to shut her up, but the more I sort of give her the eye, the more she's going out. You coming out to play, so my apologies.
Fantastic stuff there. Yeah, like I say, more dogs on this show, the better. That's what I say. Joshua, before we touch on the on-field issues, just a word on the financial accounts that have come out and what David touched on. I think in the main, it makes for good reading.
Yeah, I normally get Johnny to explain these things to me, so it's nice that David filled that void today. But no, I mean, it does, and I guess it confirms where the club hope to be this season. As David said, by being on a more stable footing. But it just, makes, for example, the next transfer window so important, and the one after that, when, we've obviously discussed the contracts next season and whatnot. But as David mentions, that will include the Aribo and Bassi money next season, as well as Champions League money, which that will be included next year as well. So yeah, I guess that good for the club to have some positive news given everything that's going on the field at the moment. And going back to the game tonight, I think everyone inside will just be crossing everything they can that they can get 3 points tonight because of obviously what happened at the weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. David, I want to get your views on, of course, we spoke to the manager yesterday. Now, me and Johnny came on a video last night to discuss the fallout from that press conference. Not much really to talk about, but an interesting point he made with comments made by Brian Laudrup with regards to his body language. He was asked about this at the press conference. And he replied, "I have given up. I think that's very easy and stupid thing to say from Brian. He knows the pressure you're under. I know I get a lot of questions about my body language, but I don't think it's anything about body language. It's about what you bring to the players inside. I get many questions about how I should be different on the sidelines, but I am me. I am me. I'm not anyone else. And the last thing we all need is people putting the pressure even higher by suggesting things which aren't true." So I totally disagree with him. Not ideal, a bit of a spat between a Rangers legend, David. I can see where he's coming from, right enough. He is under a bit of pressure, the manager, at the moment. I don't think body language is certainly a thing that he takes too kindly to. But what do you make of those comments from Laudrup and Gio's reaction?
Yeah, this is one of these situations that are best avoided, I think, by the manager, because you can't really win, right?
Yeah.
We were on that press conference yesterday, Derek, and for those who maybe don't know how press conferences work, what will happen is we, as the broadcast guys, will get our bit. That's the one that goes out. That's the video that people will see, and then the daily print journalists will get their section, and it's embargoed. We can't talk about that until they print it. And I'll be honest, when he said that, I winced, because you could see what the headline was going to be. You knew straight away. And it's easy for me to say, because if it'd been me, then what I would have went is, well, Brian's entitled to his opinion. However, I disagree. I haven't, not at all. I'm 100% focused. And you just bat it away. But we forget that these guys are human. He was angry. That's an angry response. That's what that was, because he's under pressure, and pressure does this to us. And it doesn't matter if you're a football manager. It doesn't matter if you're on thousands of pounds a week. You're a human being, and you react in that way. You're not going to win. And the ironic thing about it is I think everybody knows Brian Laudrup probably didn't even say that, because these columns that footballers do that are written by, they're ghostwritten. And what will happen is that they'll have a general chat, and the writer will say, "Do you think he's under pressure?" And Brian Laudrup will say something, and then there's a wee bit of creative license given to it. Look, it doesn't change anything. It's just as you say, there are certain people at Rangers you're probably not going to win a fight with, right? And you don't want to become embroiled in one. And Brian Laudrup is probably one of them. Equally, I can understand. I think that footballers do have that. There's a certain sort of unwritten code in things that you can say and that you shouldn't say. And that's why there are certain pundits that are very unpopular within the game, because managers and players feel that they go over the score, and that there are just certain things that you shouldn't say about a pro. And I think that that's where Gio felt. I think, if you were just going to take out, the reality and the politics of a situation where Gio is currently, I think Brett, if somebody said that you'd given up at your work and, you weren't really trying, be offended by that. So I think Gio was, from a personal human point of view, totally entitled to say, no, that's not true. And again, do we want him to go, "Hi, Brian's spot on, by the way, I've chucked it." I feel for him, even though it's more politically sensible to just go, Brian's entitled to his opinion. I respect him. He's a club legend. However, no, that's not the case. But people are human, and sometimes in the heat of the moment, and as I say, we saw that question being answered. We saw his response, and he bristled. He was visibly angered by it. And in a way, that's better. I'd far rather have somebody that did take offence to that than somebody that, as I say, maybe just meekly accepted it.
Yeah, and as Jim says, it was all it did was give the papers a headline. They've been rubbing their hands with Clee when he was coming out with that. Stephen Gillespie says Laudrup isn't a body language expert, as far as I know. The type of nonsense takes away from the real problems on and off the park. Another point I wanted to touch on get your point of view, Joshua, is a situation with regards to Alex Lowry. He played last night for the B team, incidentally. Read into that what you will, but the comments from the manager yesterday were interesting. Denzel gets in touch. Hi, Denzel. The Lowry situation worries me. I thought Gio was quite dismissive when Derek asked him about his fitness yesterday. He can't afford to fall out with our talented players. He said that he's fit, but he's not in the squad this evening. He was then pressed on it and said that the 20 players that are in the matchday squad all deserve to be there. And he's come back from an injury, of course, last season, which was a long time ago. Would you like to have seen Alex Lowry this evening, Joshua, or based on the fact we've seen him last night for the B team, is it another case of he's just trying to get more minutes for David McCallum's side before being integrated back in?
Well, I think by all accounts he wasn't very good last night for the B team, and over on Heart and Hand, the boys' B team show. I think it was a rather long one discussing that, if I'm right, David, discussing Alex Lowry's performance in that game. This is a situation for me that if Rangers are playing well, it's not a situation because there's players ahead of them. But when they're in, it's somewhat of crisis mode, you're 7 points behind. You've lost so many games, including Europe in the first half, or the first chunk of the season. Then something like this does become an issue. And to go back to both of what you were saying, all of us have dealt with Van Bronckhorst a lot by now. He's very calm. He doesn't give anything away. I can't think of any real times I've really seen him, riled up, very composed. Even when he's had difficult questions, when he's had to defend his philosophy, he never really, plays games that you see other managers play. He's not very confrontational. So I totally agree that I think that speaks to, the pressure he's under and the reality of the situation at the moment. But that goes with something like the Lowry situation as well, because people will read more into that, especially having seen him in the Champions League. That's probably more due to the homegrown rule that and the number of injuries last week. But when you have 20 players, when people see Alex Lowry fit and people see he's not in the squad, that's what they see. They don't see, obviously, the time he spent out, the need to get more game time, etc., etc. So is he ready to start tonight? Obviously, none of us really know because we're not privy to the medical information, how fit these players are, how much game time they need. I just think it's one of these situations that when you're in a run of form as you are at the moment, it just adds more fuel to the fire of frustration because people aren't enjoying watching that team that much. So they want someone who will try something, who will be inventive, and Lowry will definitely give you that.
Latching on to it, David, I think what people are maybe confused about is because we've seen him come on against Ajax, then you're thinking to yourself, okay, that's him back into the squad, into the reckoning for a place in the team, and then we don't see him for the next 2 games. So that's you can understand why supporters may be scratching their head as to what's going on there.
Yeah, because I think he's a creative player in a team that lacks creativity. There was a comment from one of the listeners that was spot on, which is that maybe we overplay expectations of him. And I can be guilty of that. And it's exactly what Josh said. It's because the team isn't playing well. So it's right, well, if we got anything that can come in and make a difference, he can do that. Alex Lowry can do that. And therefore, you demand to see him in the side. I'm a great believer that managers don't, especially managers under pressure, don't leave match winners in the stand for no reason. Because it can turn your whole season around. It can turn your job around. And Josh mentioned the boys who went to the B team last night, he had a howler. He had a really, really bad game last night. And again, that will happen with a boy his age anyway. We all know that teenagers can be inconsistent up and down. And then there's a factor, I think one of the listeners brought that point up there on the screen, which is that chipping kids into a team right now that is struggling, that isn't doing well, that the senior players aren't going to be able to help you through the match. I felt against Ajax, for example, that we had an 18 or 22-year-old non-centre back at centre back, and I didn't think those two guys got any help from the senior players in the team that night. So it's a lot of factors to try and balance in. But I certainly, as somebody who yesterday was like, I can't, why wouldn't you have Alex Lowry in the squad? And I must admit, I would still be tempted purely because he's a player. But I can understand why maybe, when I spoke to the guys who were at the game last night, they said he was miles off it.
Yeah, fair enough. Lots of comments coming in here, Josh. I want to get your point of view on this. The interestingly named Pigeon Strangler says, Ruud van Yilmaz isn't happy about his lack of game time and is requested to leave. This is a report I seen late last night. It came from Turkish media suggesting his former club Besiktas are interested in taking him back to Turkey. Likewise, Trabzonspor and Galatasaray also credited with an interest. Apparently, unconfirmed reports that he's unhappy in Glasgow. Now, we know he's injured at the moment, but this is a rumour that surfaced a few weeks ago. I think his former club were interested in taking him back on loan in January. Can't quite see it happening myself, but again, it's another one. You don't know what's happening behind the scenes. What do you make of this?
No, I mean, obviously, Rangers have spent so much money on him, and although it's taken him time to settle, and Van Bronckhorst spoke about that, didn't he, a couple of times, saying it's been quite difficult for him to settle. He's 21. That's fair. It's 2 years younger than me. It is, is young. You forget sometimes that these are just young guys moving to a completely different environment. Glasgow's obviously quite different from Turkey, learning a new language. But then you look at his performance away in Naples. I thought he was Rangers' best player, which admittedly wasn't that difficult a task. Starts positively against Aberdeen, gets that injury. For me, I remember when Ruud van Yilmaz came in, speaking to people about him and his ambitions and where he wants to play. He's already a Turkish international. I don't think his plan is to go back to Turkey after a few difficult months. And he would be in this team if not for the injury. That's a reality. I think it should have happened quicker. I think you can see what he brings, and even when he's played in League Cup games, which isn't the highest level of opposition, he's always been one of the more positive players. So I think he will be Rangers' first choice left back as soon as he's back fit. It's just unfortunate that he got injured. It's one of these situations at the moment that, similarly with Sakala, when it rains it pours, and he was a real bright spark in that team, and is now obviously out until after the World Cup. But I just think logic tells you that Ridvan isn't going to want to go back to Turkey when he's left Turkey and made that almost first step to where presumably he wants to go, which is the Premier League. I think he'll have seen that when he's had a chance, he's taken it. He'll have seen that he did eventually usurp Borna Barisic for that Aberdeen game, and will have his eyes on making sure of that when he gets back after the World Cup.
It's the story of Rangers season, isn't it, David? Yilmaz going to get injured last week, wasn't it? After it looks like he was coming on to a game, thought it was one of the shining lights, you could say, away in Naples, and then injured at the following game, a hamstring injury. It's just been one thing. Never rains but it pours with regards to Rangers injuries, isn't it?
Yeah, the words that came out of my mouth when I saw you get injured can translate to go forth and multiply, because it was just such a microcosm of our season. I actually thought he set the tempo in that game against Aberdeen right from the start. He got on the ball and he went forward, and he drove forward 3 times in the opening 5 minutes, and it got the crowd up, and the rest of the team moved forward with him. Firstly, the Turkish media, God love them, they report everything, and by that what I mean is, if you can come up with a conceivable situation, they will report that it can happen. And their culture in the media is to then go, look, we told you. You're like, yeah, but you told us he was going there, right? They cover every base. So I wouldn't read too much into that. Against that, I agree with Josh, what Josh said. He did take time to settle. They clearly did want him to develop and maybe learn the Scottish game a little bit through training, but he had taken that role. It was his spot. Also, I think Rangers have got too much of their transfer credibility wrapped up in him, because when criticism was being made earlier in the season, we heard Stuart Robertson and John Bennett both come out and say he's here for 5 years, not for 5 weeks, etc., etc. So if he was to go inside, 6 months, then I think that would be a huge blow to their credibility at a time when they can't really do that. So again, to go back to politics, politically, I don't think they could sell him, even if they desperately wanted to. I don't think they can. And they don't, by the way, in case anyone, please don't misunderstand me, they don't want to sell him. So no, I agree with Josh. He would be playing tonight if he was fit. The spot is his now. And I think in the second half of the season, you'll see him play a lot more. Obviously, again, we don't know. Maybe he isn't particularly happy in Glasgow, but footballers tend to, especially if they're ambitious, they tend to just get through that. I mean, at 21 years old to be moving to a completely different country where he didn't speak the language, incidentally, that's a tough one as well. But I think now that you'll see him going. But he's a great story for the Turkish media because they can just say, especially if you don't look at the context, if you just present the base facts and say he's only started X amount of games, doesn't take account that yes, but now he's actually doing that. So I really would be surprised and incredibly disappointed. So I just don't see it happening.
Yeah, I think it would be similar if a Scottish player went abroad and the same thing was taking place. I seem to remember, I'm not too sure if it was the same with Aaron Hickey at the start at Bologna. He was linked with a move back home after the first few months. But
They were saying exactly the same at Bologna, and I think it was a very similar thing with Lewis Ferguson, that they were like, he doesn't know how to play in Italy yet, so we can't put him in the first team, but he's getting there. I think it was that with Ridvan as well.
Yeah, you need to give these lads time. Some of the comments coming in, let's touch on some of these. Aldo says, JVB being questioned why we're getting so many injuries is surely it's connected to the players' lack of fitness. I asked the manager this, I think last week, just mainly to do with the concerns about the fitness of the team. He says it was based on the Champions League schedule being more intense than Europa League. They've not changed any training, apparently, and they're getting a lot of contact, initial impact injuries as opposed to muscle injuries, although we've seen Ridvan and Sakala pick up muscle injuries since then. Joshua, is this a concern? Do 2 and 2 make 4 with regards to this? A lot of concerns with regards to the team's fitness, maybe not being as fit as what they were last season, or does the manager get a point that condensed fixture schedule? He does say that it's not just Rangers that are being affected by these injuries, teams across Europe.
Yeah, well, I think that is true, and obviously that's not something that is an argument people want to hear, but repeatedly we hear managers, normally it's Jurgen Klopp down south saying that we're playing too much football. How do you improve football? You give teams a couple of free weeks, and the schedule of Rangers games has been so intense. And I think you look at someone like Connor Goldson and you look at the number of games he's played over the last few seasons as an example. The fitness issue, it was only in April and May that Rangers were being regarded as if their fitness had went up. That was a narrative. Now it seems to have flipped to the opposite. Obviously, we don't have any expertise in that, and there's a lot of people in the club who will have a lot of expertise in that and spend their whole time making sure that the players are at peak fitness. So I don't think that argument holds, any weight at all for me. I think you can say that maybe the players haven't played with enough intensity, and you can look at Van Bronckhorst saying at home to Aberdeen that he emphasised the fast start, compared that to previous home league games, and you can start to put 2 and 2 together and make 4 and see, well, okay, maybe it's not a fitness thing, maybe it's more of an intensity thing. But you've got to take him at his words, because again, he's gonna, and his staff are going to be putting so much time into making sure that players are as fit as possible. And I certainly don't have the expertise to try and pick holes in that. But the situation that Rangers find themselves in with the number of injuries at the moment is obviously hugely problematic, and has been over the last few weeks. Tonight against Hearts, at home, Rangers have been generally good. They've had the highest expected goals at home in the league. Away from home, as we wrote, and I'm going to link this in the comments below, they've been pretty bad, and which obviously carried on away at St Johnstone. But even just their basic performance levels, if you think away to Motherwell, that's probably a good example of that. So, I think St Mirren will be the biggest test of this squad before the break, and will really, maybe decide it one way or another for Van Bronckhorst if this league season is over, because they've also got a very good record at home. St Mirren and Hearts. Robbie Neilson tends to have a bit of a go at Rangers, which tends to normally suit Rangers. Perfect example is the 4-0 game, obviously earlier in the season. So it'll be interesting to see what he does tonight with that in mind.
Yeah, I go along with what Graham Brown says here. He says, get them on the dunes at Gullin. I totally agree. Jock Wallace style, get them up there, running up and down and being sick. I actually done an interview, folks, it'll be soon with you, with Stuart Beattie, who played with the club in the 80s, and he spoke about that. Every player was sick when they done that pre-season, but certainly didn't do them any harm whatsoever. Comment coming in here, David, I want to get your thoughts on this. William Matheson gets in touch. Good morning today from the mountains in Gran Canaria. What do you guys think of the recent comments from Dick Advocat giving Gio full backup? I don't think it's relatively surprising, David, given that he mentored him, he had him at Rangers, and he also helped him out at Feyenoord when he was starting out his managerial career there. He's obviously given Gio the backing, says now is not the time to think about a managerial change. What did you make of Advocat's comments?
Well, I'd want my dad backing me up as well.
Yeah.
Struggling, I think, look, as you mentioned, there he is. He's kind of football father. And the respect is mutual. If Gio's talked about Dick Advocat before. Again, go back. They're human beings. You would expect somebody to be loyal. I think we remember Walter Smith talking about Ali McCoist as a manager, and was maybe more to do with personal feelings than it was about a kind of dry analysis of him. I think that, again, we mentioned at the start about there are certain things in football, and managers do tend to say that other managers should be given more time because it's there, but for the grace of God go I. They've all been in situations where they need time. And I think there's a bit of a managers' union there that you come out and back him. And look, he's right. This has been the strange situation about this, that if you're just going to look at it from what's Van Bronckhorst's achievements, you can put together a case to say he shouldn't be under pressure. You absolutely can. You can say, well, UEFA Cup final and he won the Scottish Cup. Equally, he's a wee bit of kind of Schrodinger's manager at the moment, because the other side of that is the one that I'm kind of on, which is, but 6-point lead over Celtic, completely gone, 7 points behind before the end of November. So it's a strange situation. It's not a very straightforward. It's just a completely, it's not Pedro, where it's just so obvious to everybody that what should happen. So no, I would understand and respect Dick Advocat backing up Giovanni Van Bronckhorst, but as I say, I would maybe not take him as a neutral witness.
Yeah, Sam Mullen gets in touch regarding the Gullin on the dunes. No. Training has changed with time. The hit is what they're doing now, the high intensity stuff. Yeah, I do say that in jest, Sam. I think the trips to Gullin for pre-season training are well in the past nowadays. Comment coming in here with regards set pieces. Josh, I want to get your opinion on this. I asked James Tavernier about this yesterday. Mark Lawson gets in touch. Hi, Mark. Watched the Livy game last night. 3 corners, a goal and a penalty. Why can't we do this? Serious play issues. I asked Tavernier about this yesterday, and this is the response he gave me when asked. It is his concern about set pieces as something not translating from the training ground to the games. He says, I'm not entirely sure, because if you saw the first half, I think we won quite a lot of set pieces, the first headers, and obviously my goal was from a set piece. I know it was the second phase, but we always continue to work hard at set pieces. I think anyone with eyes at the moment, Josh, I can see that the set pieces and deliveries into the box have just been lacking a bit of quality at the moment with regards to Rangers. How do they go about improving this?
That's a very charitable way of putting it, Derek. You'll both know from having sat next to me at football games that one of the things that frustrates me most is set pieces and throw-ins. Stop throwing the ball up the line. I hate it. It's the most stupid thing in the world, because you just give it back to the opposition.
Especially if you can't control that initial throw. Rangers are horrendous. Somebody then controls it on their knee and it goes up here, and suddenly you've got 2 players in it. You cannot have the amount of set pieces we've had and produce what you've produced from them and then say there isn't an issue there. Something's not working. Yeah,
definitely. And to follow on from Mark's point, I think I mentioned this earlier in the week, Derek. I was watching Burnley Sheffield United on Saturday, which was a great game, 5-2. I think Sheffield United scored from 3 set pieces, and it just showed the value of it. If Rangers, Tavernier can say that they got first contact, but I think that's different from actually creating genuine set piece opportunities. Rangers had 20 corners and they had 0.85 expected goals from those corners. So, they're not even expected to score one goal from the chances that they generated. Like throw-ins, it's an opportunity to be a step ahead of the opposition. They don't know what you're going to do, and you can take advantage of that. And you see all around football, and you've seen with Rangers under Steven Gerrard and last season, Rangers scored 15 goals from corners last season. They can make such an impact. And the best example of that is if Rangers score from a corner, and one of the 10 corners I think it was they had before St Johnstone scored the weekend, it's a completely different game. It's just another opportunity, another potential marginal gain. And the thing that stood out to me was because it was constant outswingers and there wasn't a kind of different routines. There wasn't the odd in swinger. There wasn't even the odd short corner. I think it became too predictable from a St Johnstone point of view regarding what Rangers were going to do. And David's right. I mean, everyone here has watched every Rangers game this season. How many times have you thought they've looked genuinely threatening from corners? I think the fact that they don't have many strong headers of the ball, especially like Goldson, Helander and Balogun from last season, and the team makes a difference, but they don't look threatening from that. And so many examples of how important set pieces have been. The Old Firm game in the 55 season that decided that one. As I say, 15 goals from corners last season. I think it's 3 so far if you include Taverniers from the second phase and Tillman's against St Johnstone first time around from the second phase. So I always think it's just a non-negotiable that you should be making the absolute most out of them. And I don't think you can say whether by luck, whether they are working really hard, whatever the argument is. I don't think the output is sufficient for the number of opportunities Rangers are having in those moments.
Yeah, Ross Nielsen. Yeah, carry on, David.
3 main areas at set pieces: delivery, movement, and desire. And that's what Rangers are falling down on. Delivery isn't good enough, clearly. As Josh says, it's constantly the same thing and not of a high quality. Very few balls come in with whip, that are right in that area where a goalkeeper can't come for it and a defender doesn't quite know what to do. Secondly, we then don't have enough movement within the box. A lot of our players are static or are easily held off because, as we know, blocking goes on at corners.
Yeah.
A tactic that's used in football. You can't cry about it. And we don't have enough guys who are bright enough in their movement or vary their movement up enough to get there. And thirdly, exactly what Josh said, that Helander header is a great example. That's my ball from about 10 yards before it arrives. I will be on the end of that. And I want to be on the end of it more than my direct opponent here does. So if you get those 3 factors together, that I thought that Josh's example at the weekend about Burnley was absolutely spot on. I watched that match, Burnley versus Sheffield United, and Sheffield United terrorised them because they had Oliver Norwood, who's a terrific dead ball specialist, putting in balls with whip and spin and really just dangerous balls. And they had 2 or 3 guys that were just making sure I'm on the end of this. Now, of course, not every header was perfect, and some of the headers way over the bar, but the Rangers didn't have enough of that at the weekend, and you can't have 20 corners and do as badly as he did from it. And I know Tav's saying, well, we scored from one. We miss a Rebo in this. I don't think that we realised, and I include myself in this, how important he was at that, because he had those 3 things. Not only did he get in the end of things, people knew that the ball was going to him and he still got in the end of it. Why? Because he was clever in his movement and he wanted it more than the opposition. Those are the 3 areas I think Rangers desperately need to improve on. At the moment, it looks like hit and hope. I don't know why Tav does signals before it, because we all know where the ball's going, Tav, and so do the opposition. And that is unfortunately what's been happening at the moment. And even when Rangers try and work an angle at a corner, it just results in the same ball being put in from 10 yards deeper. So you've got to vary it up. They're not doing enough at set pieces. And they can argue with you or I or the listeners as fans and say, well, we're professionals, we know what we're doing. But we can see it. And Josh just nailed it there. The results, the outputs tell us they're not doing enough on set pieces.
Yeah, totally agree. And as Ross Nielsen rightly puts as well, we've lost our threat from corners. Barrie, Balogun, Aribo, Goldson injured currently. We have no danger attacking corners and look weak defending them. Can't disagree with much of that Ross says. Wanted to touch on this just before we wrap up. Joshua, Alan gets in touch. Do you think Hearts will press us tonight? In my opinion, it's quite obvious we struggle against a low block. I'm secretly hoping that they're going to come out a la Aberdeen style and have a go. There's no reason why they shouldn't. They'll sense that Rangers coming off a defeat. They'll have belief that they can come and get something, and I'm sure the Hearts supporters will be wanting them to come and have a go as well. Will that play into Rangers' hands?
Yeah, it's a great point by Alan, and I think he's absolutely right to think about it, because Hearts normally will have a go. Robbie Nielsen, to his credit, I think is a manager who wants his teams to be aggressive to a point against the Old Firm, and that was the case last season in that 5-0 game just after, I think it was early February, when John Lundstrom first came into the team after or before Dortmund. But tonight, will he look at that and think that's the best approach? I mean, you've got to expect from a Hearts point of view that someone has looked at their game against Aberdeen, has looked at Van Bronckhorst's comments, and has said, you know what, the best option today is to not go and leave them space, but it is to make them set the tempo. And I think that's, as we've spoken about so many times, that's where Rangers struggle. I think it's too reliant on individualism in the final third. And what I mean by that isn't necessarily they want players to score from 30 yards, but I think a lot of emphasis is placed on wingers and winning their duels. And when wingers are out of form, that results in the attack and play not always looking brilliant. So if I was Hearts travelling to Ibrox tonight, I'd be very tempted to try and limit space, remain compact, make sure that Rangers don't get an early goal. From Van Bronckhorst's point of view, I think he'll be hoping that Hearts, like they did at Tynecastle, like they did this season, are aggressive and leave space, because that's when Rangers have looked at their best. But to go back to an earlier point, Derek, I think the real difficult game is St Mirren away. They have one of the best home records in the league. I think it might even be the third best home record in the league. They've really struggled away from home. We know Stephen Robinson, how defensively disciplined his teams can be. They beat Celtic earlier in the season. It's a tight pitch. I think that's going to be the real test for Rangers. If Rangers were to go and win tonight, I don't think that tells us too much, because, as I say, they've been strong at home. They've had the highest expected goals. They've scored a lot of goals. To my mind, they've never been in danger of losing a league game at home this season. Aside from Livingston, they haven't been in danger of losing a league game. It's away from home where I think the difficulties have arisen, as was the case against St Johnstone. So that's the game that I think you'll learn more from, and more attention should be cast on that as the week goes on.
Yeah. What's your feeling tonight? Your overriding feeling, David? Can you sense getting back to winning ways? For me, I'm concerned not only tonight but Saturday as well. St Mirren's going to be a tough place to go. What's your feeling for the next two matches?
Yeah, I kind of echo what Josh said. At home, I think that the players are more confident, and it took them to really not show up against Livingston, let's be honest, where it was a terrible performance, just lacking in every area. To not get a result in that one. Hearts are pretty injury riddled themselves. They have had to go to play in these European games that they haven't been used to, and it's taken a real real turn on their squad. He's off his head if he comes and goes toe to toe, because he's got a depleted squad, and you pick the team that can win the game. And while I'm sure there are Hearts fans, this is the pressure of being a quite big club in our league, as their fans go, no, go and have a go. But the sensible approach is genuinely, no, don't go and try and hit on the break and try and use Shankland and try and get in behind. But sitting and frustrate because of the mood of the Ibrox crowd, you can get caught between two stools, and I sincerely hope they do. And I'm not quite sure, should we go for this? Should we sit in and they end up doing now? I agree with Bob there. I think we'll get a reaction from Saturday, but I'm afraid I also agree with Josh that we'll need a performance from Rangers away from home that they haven't delivered in quite some time at the weekend, because St Mirren will be bang up for this. They've managed something nobody else has done, unfortunately, this season, and beaten Celtic domestically. So, I think we'll be fine tonight. I don't anticipate a classic, by the way. You've got two beat-up, tired sides.
Yeah.
And I don't think that, you're going to get a scintillating game of football regardless. I think that Rangers will go out and empty the tank tonight a little bit. I'm concerned about Saturday. Saturday for me is a litmus test. That said, drop points tonight and it will be feral. There's just that's the situation that they're in. Drop points in either, and the mood will be angry. But do it
Yeah.
tonight. But they should win tonight. There really aren't any excuses. Yes, it's Hearts, but it's nowhere near a full Hearts 11. I know it's nowhere near ours, but the team we put in the park will be earning a good chunk more than the team Hearts put in the park. We should win. I'm taking us to win 2-0 in a fairly turgid match, but Saturday is one that I might not sleep as well on Friday as I like to.
Yeah, in tonight's game, folks, as well, just a reminder, it is at the annual Remembrance Day event. There will be a minute's silence before kickoff as well to commemorate those who of course, made the ultimate sacrifice. So that's taking place at Ibrox. And also today, Teddy Bear says there's a Croatia squad announced today. Wonder if Big Cholak will make it. I believe it is announced at some point today, so we'll keep our fingers crossed that both he and Borna will make the Croatian squad. I think he deserves it. Just before we go, Joshua, would you like to see Cholak playing for Croatia in the World Cup?
Yeah, we spoke to him at the press conference last week, and you can tell how much it just means to some players. So fingers crossed for him. I think the US one is released today as well. The only other thing I was going to say, Derek, right? I was going to give a little tip, not a betting tip. I was watching on my day off yesterday PSV versus Ajax, obviously because PSV versus Ajax. I was interested to see how they played. If anyone has a spare 20 minutes and wants to watch the extended highlights, it is some of the most fun you will have, because the fights, you know, the scenes that this commentators say we don't want to see, but we really do want to see. Fantastic. So go watch that. Just interesting to see. I watched out of a interest in, obviously, you know, the whole argument about where Rangers can compete, what level, etc., and what we've kind of been talking about. But yeah, stayed for the fights because they were good fun. So check that out if you've got some time beforehand.
Yeah, condoning violence. That's the views of Joshua, not the Rangers review. Although I hear that the Ajax manager getting a bit of stick after that result at the weekend, losing to PSV. Okay, that'll do us there, folks. Thanks very much, David Edgar, for joining us. Thank you, David.
A pleasure, guys. Thank you.
And Joshua as well, you guys will be at the game tonight, hopefully watching Rangers get back to winning ways. There is absolutely no wriggle room for Giovanni van Bronckhorst at the moment. As always, we'll have all the pre-match coverage. Joshua and Johnny will be at Ibrox for us later on, folks, and we'll have the post-match reaction as well. So I hope you can join us for that. But until then, enjoy your Wednesday morning and afternoon.